Usually you picture a society collapsing, like something straight out of a big-budget disaster movie.
Oh, right, yeah, like a meteor or something.
Exactly. A meteor streaks across the sky,
Yeah.
or a massive earthquake shatters a city skyline in like a matter of seconds.
Mm-hmm.
It's an external force. It's incredibly sudden, and the physical devastation is just absolute. You can literally walk through the aftermath, point to a sheared-off bridge or a smoldering skyscraper and say, there it is. That is the destruction.
Yeah, the threat is highly visible, and, well, everyone universally understands it. I mean, it's a structural failure of concrete and steel, which is terrifying, obviously, but it's a known quantity.
Yeah.
We have this deep psychological preference for collapses that come from the outside,
Right.
Something visible, easily categorized, and most importantly, something we can collectively unite against. Because an earthquake doesn't really care about your politics.
No, it doesn't. But stepping into the world of human history, or sociology, and ultimately theology, that whole disaster movie paradigm gets flipped completely upside down.
It really does.
Because you look at a civilization, and the buildings are still standing.
Right.
The physical infrastructure is entirely intact. I mean, aqueducts are flowing, the markets are open, the walls are fortified, but the society itself is basically disintegrating from the inside out.
Yes.
We're looking at a structural collapse that is honestly completely invisible to the naked eye until it's just entirely too late.
It is the absolute definition of a moral and social earthquake. And I mean, I would argue it's infinitely more terrifying than a physical disaster.
Why is that?
Because the ground swallowing you up isn't made of dirt and rock. It's made of your neighbors.
Wow.
It's your lifelong friends. It's your own family. The threat isn't the environment at that point, It's the human heart.
That is heavy. And, well, we are jumping right into a profound exploration today. Welcome, by the way, to a brand new deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
The material we are analyzing today, it feels like it was ripped straight from a modern, cultural think piece. But the core text at the center of this analysis is actually 2,500 years old.
Yeah, it's ancient.
We are diving into this super comprehensive breakdown of an ancient Greek text, Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War.
Specifically, we're looking at his really chilling account of the civil strife,
Right.
or what the Greeks called stasis, on the island of Corcyra.
Uh-huh.
This is all found in Book 3 of his history.
And we're examining this ancient text through a very specific, multi-layered framework, aren't we?
We are, yeah. The analysis provided to us doesn't just treat this as a dry historical chronicle.
How could this?
Right. It looks at Corcyra through historical lenses, literary frameworks, and some incredibly detailed linguistic and grammatical breakdowns.
Which we will get into.
Oh, definitely. And ultimately, it looks at it through deeply theological and apologetic perspectives.
So our mission today for you, listening, is to uncover how this ancient historian perfectly diagnoses the social upheaval and the moral collapse of the society that's placed under extreme pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to take this a step further. We want to discover how staring into this stark ancient mirror can actually, deepen Christians' faith.
Exactly.
How it can inspire a much deeper love for Christ and practically equip you to live as a light in our modern, which is, let's face it, deeply polarized world.
We really have to set the stage first, though, by asking a fundamental question about human infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like, what happens when the ultimate pressure cooker of war completely melts away the guardrails of a civilized society? Thucydides is going to demonstrate in brutal, unflinching detail, that human nature fundamentally does not change.
Yeah.
But grappling with that really dark reality is the necessary first step to truly appreciating the transformative, radiant hope of the gospel.
Let's ground this historically for a second. Take us back to the 5th century BCE. Because what strikes me about Thucydides is that he isn't writing about this from some cushy library, 300 years after the dust settled.
Not at all.
He's an Athenian general. He is quite literally standing in the blood and the mud of the Peloponnesian War as he writes this. That has to fundamentally change how we read his work.
Oh, it absolutely does. Thucydides was born around 460 BCE. He was a contemporary participant, a military commander, and actually a failed one in the eyes of his state.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he failed to defend the city of Amphipolis from the Spartans and was subsequently exiled by Athens for 20 years.
Wow, 20 years.
But he used that exile brilliantly.
How so?
Well, it allowed him to travel to interview combatants and politicians from both sides of the conflict.
Not an Athenian.
Exactly. And it allowed him to write his history with a level of objectivity and investigative rigor that was just entirely unprecedented at the time.
And the conflict he's documenting, this Peloponnesian War raging from 431 to 404 BCE,
Yeah.
it wasn't just like a border skirmish.
Sure.
This was essentially the World War I of the ancient Greek world. It was a catastrophic generational conflict between two vastly different superpowers. On one side, you have Athens, which is, characterized by its democratic empire, its intellectual hubris, and its absolute dominance of the seas.
Right. Yeah.
And on the other side, you've got Sparta, a deeply conservative, oligarchic, militaristic land power.
And it pulled the entire known Mediterranean world into its orbit. Every city-state eventually had to pick a side.
Yeah.
And the specific event we are focusing on today occurs in Book 3, covering roughly the 5th and 6th years of the war, so around 428 to 427 BCE.
Okay.
Thucydides zooms in on a specific island called Corcyra, which is modern-day Corfu.
Geographically, Corcyra is significant, right? I mean, it's off the northwest coast of Greece, possessing the second largest navy in the Greek world at the time.
Yeah, it was a major player.
It was originally a Corinthian colony, and Corinth was allied with Sparta. But Corcyra had democratic leanings and formed a defensive alliance with Athens.
Exactly. And that alliance was actually one of the major flashpoints that triggered the wider Peloponnesian War to begin with.
Wow. And because of that internal tension, between its oligarchic roots and its democratic alliance, Corcyra descended into what the Greeks called stasis.
Right.
Now, in modern English, when we hear the word stasis, I think we usually picture a sci-fi movie where someone is frozen in a cryo chamber.
Yeah, exactly.
We think of something standing completely still, unchanging, frozen, like nothing is happening.
Yes. The modern usage implies a lack of movement. But in ancient Greek, the etymology carries a different, far more volatile weight, actually.
Really?
Yeah, stasis literally translates to a standing. But think of it in terms of, like, taking a stand, forming a faction, or drawing a violent line in the sand.
Ah, okay.
It is the Greek word for civil strife, bitter factionalism, or outright civil war. In Corcyra, the society fractured violently. You had the pro-Spartan oligarchs who wanted to consolidate power and break the treaty with Athens. And on the flip side, the pro-Athenian Democrats who wanted to maintain their populist control and their naval alliance.
And the resulting violence, it wasn't just armies meeting on a battlefield outside the city walls.
No.
This was intimate, street by street, neighbor against neighbor slaughter. Thucydides describes scenes where women are throwing roof tiles down onto the heads of fighting factions in the streets.
It was brutal.
But he also wants us to understand that stasis is more than just a political disagreement over foreign policy, right?
Okay. He views it as a total, devastating societal collapse. And this didn't happen in a vacuum. The environment surrounding this collapse was a literal pressure cooker.
Yeah.
The analysis highlights that the entire Greek world was vibrating with fear and trauma at this point.
Because Athens itself, early in the war, was ravaged by a horrific plague.
Right.
Pericles had ordered all the citizens of the surrounding countryside to pack inside the long walls of Athens to wait out the Spartan sieges.
Mm-hmm.
So you had massive overcrowding, terrible sanitation, the summer heat, and then the plague hit.
A perfect storm.
Thucydides describes people dying in the streets, piling up in the temples, dogs and birds refusing to eat the unburied bodies. I mean, the sheer existential panic of that moment is hard to even fathom.
It really is, and you combine that with the brutality of drawn-out military sieges, like the Siege of Plataea, or massive bloody revolts like the Mytilenean Revolt.
Yeah.
The psychology of the entire region was pushed to the absolute breaking point. And Thucydides introduces a chilling philosophical concept to explain the result. He argues that war acts as a violent teacher. Some translators even render it as a harsh master.
I want to spend some time on that phrase, a violent teacher. What exactly is war teaching them?
Well, it's less about imparting new knowledge and more about violently stripping away illusions. Thucydides posits that in times of peace and prosperity, Individuals in city-states act with a certain level of decency.
Sure.
They obey the laws, they honor the gods, they treat their neighbors with respect. But they do this because they are not forced by sudden, dire necessities. They have margins.
They have the luxury of being decent.
Exactly. They have luxury. But war strips away those margins. It brings people's daily lives down to a level of sheer desperate survival.
Yeah.
And Thucydides says that war assimilates their passions to their present circumstances. When your daily reality is starvation, fear, and the threat of an enemy army, your internal emotional state degrades to match that brutal reality.
This brings up the tension between two massive Greek concepts that form the bedrock of this analysis, doesn't it? Nomos and physis.
Yes. Nomos represents custom, law, tradition, religious restraints. It is the complex web of shared social contracts that hold a community together. It's the agreed-upon rules of civilization.
Okay.
Physis, on the other hand, is raw human nature, the primal, unchecked base impulses of humanity.
Like fear, greed.
Exactly. Fear, greed, ambition, self-interest, the drive to dominate, all of that is physis.
Let's conceptualize this, because I think of an analogy here. Society is a house, okay?
I like that.
And nomos, the laws, the Constitution, but also just the polite greetings at the grocery store, the expectation that someone will stop at a red light, the religious fear of the gods, those are the load-bearing wall.
Right? The roof, the plumbing, the wiring.
Yeah, it makes the house livable. War, this violent teacher, is a Category 5 hurricane.
Oh, wow.
So when the hurricane hits and the walls of nomos are ripped entirely away, we find out exactly what the foundation, our physis, our human nature, is actually made of.
That's a great way to picture it. And to take that hurricane analogy a step further, the scary part isn't just that the house blows down.
Right.
The terrifying revelation of Corcyra is that once the house falls, the survivors immediately start using the rubble to bludgeon each other. Thucydides' devastating conclusion is that the foundation itself is deeply flawed. Human nature, when unchecked by law and custom, is ruled by passion, revenge, and a ruthless desire for power.
But I look at a crisis, and I wonder about the causality. Does the hurricane of war actually change human nature into something monstrous? Or does it simply expose what was already lurking behind polite society the entire time?
Thucydides is unequivocally arguing for exposure, not transformation.
Okay.
The base nature, the physis, was always there. The stasis simply removed the fear of the law, the nomos that kept it hidden.
Wow.
He explicitly writes that these atrocities are happening and always going to happen as long as human nature remains the same.
Oh, yeah.
It is a profoundly realistic, albeit deeply pessimistic, anthropology. The beast isn't created by the war. The beast is merely let off the leash.
And the very first thing the beast attacks when the leash comes off isn't necessarily physical. It's not the grain silos, the armories, or the government buildings. The very first casualty of stasis is the truth itself.
Yes.
It is the complete corruption of language.
This is one of the most famous and chilling observations in all of ancient literature, actually. It's found in Thucydides 3.82.
Okay.
He notes a phenomenon that is universally recognizable today. In order to justify the horrific things they were doing to each other, the citizens of Corcyra literally had to change the ordinary meanings of words.
To change the dictionary.
The dictionary itself was subverted.
Let's look at the specific examples he provides because they are wild. He says that reckless audacity was suddenly rebranded as courage loyal to party.
Yeah, and he also points out that prudent hesitation or moderation, which, remember, were traditionally the highest, most celebrated virtues in Greek society.
Like the absolute hallmark of a good, stable citizen.
Exactly. Moderation was suddenly smeared as cowardice or a cloak for unmanliness.
That is insane.
The ability to see all sides of an issue, to be measured, thoughtful, and to seek compromise was suddenly declared an absolute inability to act. You were either a radical, violent partisan or you were a traitor. There was no middle ground.
Try to picture how this actually plays out in a town square.
Yeah.
You have a mob led by someone who is fundamentally a reckless, violent hothead.
Right.
In a healthy society, nomos would identify that person as a danger, a criminal, a threat to public order.
A total liability.
Yeah. But in stasis, the mob redefines his violence. They slap a heroic-sounding label on it. They call his brutality loyalty and courage.
It is the ultimate weaponization of language, and this linguistic manipulation isn't an accident. It's not a byproduct of the chaos. It is the central engine of the chaos.
The engine.
Yeah. By redefining the virtues, the leaders of these factions gave their followers permission to act on their darkest impulses.
Wow.
Passion, self-interest, and a terrifying concept the Greeks called pleonexia, the insatiable desire for more, the drive to overreach and take what belongs to others, became the new dominant virtues.
There's a deep psychological question here about motivation, though. When the leaders of Corcyra changed the meaning of these words, did they know they were lying? Like, deep down, did they know they were acting like monsters? And they just needed to slap a new label on their actions to soothe their own consciences? Or did the words themselves actually create a new reality for them?
That goes straight to the heart of a major scholarly debate surrounding a specific Greek word Thucydides uses in this passage. Diagnostic. The debate centers on whether the factions exchanged the meanings of words for a new justification or merely a new rationalization.
What is the practical difference between those two interpretations?
Well, if it's just rationalization, it means, I know I'm doing evil, but I'm going to call it good so I can sleep at night. I'm lying to myself.
Right.
But if it's a new justification, it means the language corruption has actually rewritten my moral reality.
That's terrifying.
And Thucydides seems to lean heavily into the latter. The terrifying power of stasis is that it creates a completely inverted moral universe.
Right.
Once you successfully convince your faction that moderation is literally treason, then slaughtering the moderates isn't unnecessary evil. It becomes a moral imperative. You are acting justly within the new, corrupted parameters of the language.
And once that moral universe is inverted, the ceiling for violence is completely removed.
Yeah.
I mean, the analysis points out a chilling dynamic. Knowledge of prior atrocities breeds worse ones.
It's an arms race of brutality. If I hear that the rival faction in another city did something unprecedented, say they executed prisoners of war, my faction has to invent a new, even more horrific action to prove our courage loyal to party.
We have to outdo their atrocity to demonstrate our ideological purity.
Precisely.
So language corruption is really a symptom of a systemic terminal decay. Once words lose their objective meaning, the social contracts built entirely on those words instantly evaporate.
Yeah.
You cannot have a peace treaty, you cannot have a functioning court of law, you cannot even have a basic marketplace transaction if the word justice or fairness means one thing to you and the exact opposite to the person standing across from you.
Exactly. When the words disappear, the bonds disappear. And that bleeds directly into the collapse of the sacred.
Yeah.
The rot doesn't stop at the steps of the courthouse or the political assembly. Thucydides documents that the betrayal seeped into the most intimate, sacred institutions of human life. The factions didn't just target political rivals, they targeted the foundational units of society.
He details horrific, intimate betrayals. He writes about fathers turning on their own sons and executing them.
It's just unthinkable.
He talks about the absolute breaking of sacred oaths.
Right. And in the ancient world, an oath wasn't just a signed contract. An oath sworn before the gods was the ultimate glue of society.
Because it carried divine weight.
It was deeply woven into their theology and their fear of divine retribution. To break an oath was to invite a curse upon yourself and your descendants.
Wow.
But in the grip of stasis, an oath was only kept as long as it was strategically useful. Breaking it to gain a tactical advantage wasn't seen as a sin. It was actively praised as cleverness.
The violation of temples is perhaps the most shocking to an ancient Greek audience. People were dragged away from the altars and slaughtered. Thucydides even mentions people being walled up inside the temple of Dionysus to starve to death.
We really have to understand the mechanics of sanctuary in the ancient Greek mind to grasp how appalling this is.
Yeah, break that down.
The altar was the ultimate safe zone. If you touch the altar, you belong to the deity.
Okay.
To spill human blood in a temple was to incur miasma, a physical, spiritual pollution that would bring the wrath of the gods down upon the entire city. It was unthinkable.
And yet they did it anyway.
They did.
They were so consumed by factional hatred, so driven by the raw physis of revenge, that they were willing to look the gods in the eye, so to speak, and risk divine annihilation just to kill a political rival.
It really shows the true, terrifying power of human nature when the nomos fails. The traditional restraints of family kinship, religious piety, and mutual trust were entirely, utterly eroded.
And Thucydides isn't documenting this as some, sensational true crime thriller. He explicitly states his purpose. He wants this text to be a katoma SII,
A katuma SI.
a possession for all time.
Yes. He is telling his readers that he isn't writing a romanticized patriotic chronicle just to please the ear of his immediate contemporaries.
Right.
He is providing a universal diagnostic of human behavior. He firmly believes that as long as human nature remains the same, these exact patterns, the language corruption, the betrayal, the violence, will repeat themselves whenever a society is put under enough pressure.
Man.
He wants future generations to read Corcyra and recognize the warning signs in their own cities.
There is an incredibly dark, tragic irony embedded in all of this.
Yeah.
The people in Corcyra were joining these violent factions, betraying their families, and committing these atrocities, primarily because they were terrified. They were desperately trying to find safety in an unsafe world.
It forces us to ask, what is the true cost of that kind of safety?
Right.
They sought security through raw power, through preemptive strikes against their neighbors, and through the betrayal of anyone who wasn't a radical partisan. But in doing so, they systematically dismantled the very mechanisms that make actual safety possible.
Exactly. Because if you destroy trust, kinship, shared truth, and religious boundaries, what is left to protect you? By trying to secure their lives through violence, they made life utterly unlivable.
Yeah.
If you can't trust a dictionary because words have been inverted, you can't trust your neighbor. And if you can't trust your neighbor, you certainly can't trust your own family or the gods they pray to at the altar. It is a state of total suffocating paranoia, even while you're surrounded by people.
That perfectly encapsulates the lived experience of stasis. But what elevates the analysis we are studying today is that it doesn't just examine what Thucydides says, it looks deeply at how he says it.
This part is fascinating.
The linguistic breakdown of these passages is extraordinary. To truly grasp the psychological weight of this horror, we have to look under the hood at the actual Greek grammar of tragedy.
I'll admit, when I first saw phrases like systemic functional linguistics and the Campbell verbal aspect framework in the material, I braced myself for a very dry academic slog.
It sounds intimidating.
It does. Grammar usually doesn't evoke deep emotion. But this analysis of how Thucydides manipulated verbs is actually mind-blowing. Let's break down this linguistic zoom lens.
It is absolutely foundational to understanding why this specific text has resonated for over 2 millennia. Let's start with the Campbell verbal aspect framework, which is the primary lens used here for analyzing the Greek verbs.
Okay.
In English, we mostly think of verbs in terms of time, past, present, future. I ran, I run, I will run.
Sure.
But ancient Greek verbs heavily encode aspect, which is how the author wants you, the reader, to view the action subjectively.
Interesting.
Is it a completed whole viewed from a great distance, or is it an ongoing process that you are placed right in the middle of?
So the analysis highlights a stark contrast in how Thucydides uses two specific types of Greek verbs in this passage, the aorist and the imperfect, or present tense.
Right. The aorist tense in Greek carries a perfective aspect. It acts as a remote summary.
Okay.
It presents an action as a complete, closed event viewed from a distance. The analyst notes that Thucydides uses the aorist verbs almost exclusively to describe the specific historical atrocities of Corcyra.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When he talks about the killings, the betrayals, the specific oaths being broken, he uses the aorist. For example, he uses the word epipes, meaning these terrible things fell upon the cities.
Nice. So it's a remote historical fact. It's like he's holding these bloody, terrible deeds at arm's length. He's looking at them through the wrong end of a telescope, pushing them away from the reader.
Exactly. It allows the reader to look at Corcyra as an isolated past event. We do this naturally with history, you know. We put dates on timelines, 1914, 1939, to distance ourselves from the horror. We say, that happened back then to those people. The aorist tense facilitates that distance.
But then he shifts gears completely. When he starts talking about the decay of society, the inversion of values, and the underlying human nature, the physis, he abandons the aorist and switches to present and imperfect verbs.
He does, and these carry an imperfective aspect. They describe ongoing, continuous, creeping action.
Now,
They bring the concept into tight, uncomfortable, immediate proximity to the reader. When he says these things are happening and always going to happen, he uses the present participle gignomina. It is immediate. It is happening right now, right in front of you, and it will happen tomorrow.
let's try to feel the psychological difference of that shift. It's a difference between reading a history book that says, in 427 BC, men struck each other down in the streets, which feels distant and safe.
Right.
Versus the historian suddenly looking up from the page, staring directly at you and saying, men are forever striking each other down, And the instinct to do so is sitting quietly inside your chest right now.
That is precisely the effect. And this is where the systemic functional linguistics, or SFL, comes in to explain the architecture of that effect.
Okay, lay it out.
SFL looks at language not just as a set of arbitrary rules, but as a resource for making meaning and shaping discourse. The analysis details the ideational and textural metafunctions. Thucydides creates this brilliant theme-reme progression.
A theme-reme progression.
Yeah, he starts with the specific historical events of Corcyra, the remote atrocities, and he builds a cohesive chain of opposing words. Courage versus cowardice, kinship versus betrayal, justice versus injustice.
He's building a trap for the reader.
He is. He uses the remote aorist to make you look at the historical carnage and say, wow, those people in Corcyra were terrible. What a tragic event.
Yeah.
But then, through the discourse tools foregrounding his thesis, he uses the present tense proximate grammar to snap the trap shut. He says, and the human nature that caused it isn't dead, it's universal. He forces the reader to recognize their own reflection in this ancient, bloody mirror.
Man. The uncomfortable truth, though, is that Thucydides isn't the only ancient writer holding up that specific mirror. This exact same reflection, this terrifying, unflinching diagnosis of the human heart, is found throughout the pages of Scripture.
The intertextual insights here are staggering. The analysis notes that Thucydides certainly echoes other Greek writers, like Homer's heroic values being inverted, or Euripides writing about the horrors of war.
Right.
There are even echoes of ancient Near Eastern city laments. But for the Christian observer, the parallels between Thucydides' secular diagnosis and the biblical diagnosis of humanity are profound.
They really are.
Both observe the exact same corporate effects of human rebellion and sin.
The Old Testament parallels are striking. The prophetic critiques of covenant breaking sound like they could have been written in the streets of Corcyra. Let's look at the prophet Isaiah. In Isaiah 5:20, he cries out, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." That is a perfect, almost word-for-word mirroring of Thucydides' observation of language inversion. They are both staring at a society that has entirely swapped its moral dictionary.
What's fascinating here is the deep continuity of a realistic anthropology across vastly different cultures. You see it acutely in Jeremiah.
The weeping prophet.
Right. He is often called the whooping prophet because he had to watch the nomos of his own civilization, Jerusalem, collapse under the Babylonian siege.
Yeah.
In Jeremiah chapter 9, he laments the total breakdown of truth and kinship. He warns the people, "Let everyone beware of his neighbor and put no trust in any brother, for every brother is a deceiver and every neighbor goes about as a slanderer."
Or Psalm 55, where David vividly describes the piercing pain of a close friend, someone he used to walk to the house of God with, betraying a sacred bond. Human nature, when left entirely to its own devices, inevitably spirals into chaos, greed, and violent power struggles.
Absolutely.
Thucydides sees it play out in a greed proxy war. The biblical prophets see it play out in the rebellion of a covenant nation.
And this diagnostic continuity moves right into the New Testament. The analysis specifically highlights the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32.
That's a heavy passage.
Very heavy. Paul talks about humanity suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. And he argues that this suppression leads to a reprobate mind, a total inversion of values, and ultimately absolute social breakdown.
Just like Corcyra.
Exactly. He lists the exact same symptoms as Thucydides: murder, deceit, maliciousness, inventors of evil, covenant breakers, and those without natural affection.
The Epistle of James hits this exact note as well. In chapters 3 and 4, James asks a diagnostic question. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? And his answer is devastatingly simple. Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you, you desire and do not have, so you murder, you covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel?
Yeah.
James is perfectly describing the internal stasis, the unchecked physis that violently erupts into external factionalism.
Both the ancient Greek historian and the biblical authors share this deeply realistic, unflinching view of fallen humanity. They agree entirely on the symptoms of the disease.
But there is a massive fundamental contrast between the two, isn't there?
Oh, definitely.
Because Thucydides is offering a strictly secular, rationalist analysis. He is looking at the chessboard, seeing how the pieces move, and realizing the game is rigged to just repeat this cycle of violence forever. It is a deeply, profoundly pessimistic worldview.
That is the crucial distinction our analysis makes. Thucydides observes the physis brilliantly, but he has no transcendent solution. He believes history is just a cyclical tragedy.
Right.
The biblical text, however, provides a covenantal theocentric view. In the Old Testament, societal chaos isn't just a cyclical historical inevitability. It is often a specific, measured judgment for rejecting God's transcendent moral order, his law.
Why does that matter? Like, why is judgment better than a cyclical tragedy?
Because judgment implies a judge. It implies a moral order. And most importantly, because it is relational, a broken covenant with a personal God, it means there's the possibility of repentance, forgiveness, and restoration.
Think of it like this. Thucydides is a brilliant, unparalleled doctor with a state-of-the-art MRI machine. He has perfectly diagnosed the societal cancer. He sees exactly how the cells are mutating, how the language is corrupting, how the body politic is systematically destroying itself.
Yes.
But he has absolutely no cure. He just hands you the scan and says, here is how you are going to die, and here is how your children will die too. For the cure, we have to look outside the Greek historian. We have to look to the great physician.
He provides the diagnosis, but the biblical narrative provides the redemptive trajectory.
Yes.
However, before we rush straight to that cure, the material we are analyzing makes a very compelling case that this ancient MRI machine is incredibly useful for Christians today.
Okay, no so.
It is a vital diagnostic tool when we are trying to understand and actually engage with our modern, deeply polarized culture.
Because we are living in a moment that, frankly, feels awfully close to the tremors of a Corcyraean stasis, particularly when it comes to the inversion and weaponization of language.
The author of the analysis we're diving into makes a direct connection between Thucydides and modern postmodern thought, specifically mentioning philosophers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida.
Okay.
Now, to understand why this matters, we have to grasp a core tenet of postmodernism: deconstructionism.
Break that down for us. What does that actually mean in practice?
Simply put, a hallmark of postmodern theory is the idea that language is not a stable mirror reflecting objective reality.
Right.
Instead, language is fluid, it is socially constructed, and most importantly, it is intrinsically tied to power dynamics. Postmodern theory argues that whoever controls the dictionary, whoever gets to define the words, controls the society. Therefore, language is often viewed as a tool of oppression used by the powerful to maintain their dominance.
You can see this in everyday life, even outside of politics. Think about corporate legal jargon. A company doesn't fire people and ruin their livelihoods. They downsize or engage in a reduction in force. A military doesn't talk about blowing up civilians. They talk about collateral damage. The language is sanitized and manipulated to protect the power structure.
Exactly. And the author of our material argues that modern phenomena, whether it's the shifting definitions of basic biological realities, the debates over what constitutes justice, the rise of cancel culture, or the deep tribal polarization of our politics, can all be viewed through this lens of language and power.
What's incredible is that Thucydides, writing 2,500 years ago, basically raises his hand and says, yes, I saw this exact same thing.
Yeah.
He provides an incredible common ground here. He absolutely agrees with the postmodernist that language can be manipulated by those in power to justify their actions.
Yeah.
He watched reckless audacity become courage.
If we look at this through the lens of cultural apologetics, this is highly strategic.
Really?
Yeah, because a secular friend or colleague might instantly dismiss a Bible verse you quote at them, but they often deeply respect a hard-nosed, rationalist, ancient historian who observed human nature without any religious bias.
So if I'm having a conversation with someone who is totally immersed in modern secular thought, I can actually use this Greek historian to build a bridge.
Yes, you can.
I can say, you're right to be suspicious of how language is used for power. You are right to see that grand narratives are often manipulated by the powerful to oppress others. But let's look at where that deconstruction ultimately leads.
That is the crucial pivot the analysis suggests. While a postmodernist might merely analyze this linguistic fluidity, or even celebrate it as a necessary way to deconstruct oppressive systems, Thucydides shows us its terrifying, destructive endgame.
Yeah.
Relativism is incredibly fragile. When you deconstruct shared meaning, when you decide that words have no objective anchor, you don't magically get a utopia of liberated, equal individuals.
Of course, Sarah. You get stasis.
You get societal breakdown. You get a world where trust is mathematically impossible because every conversation is just a raw power struggle.
But let me offer a pushback here on how we use this.
Okay.
How do we do this without just sounding like the angry guy on the street corner holding the end is nigh sign?
It's a fair question.
It's really easy to point at the news, scream, look, The sky is falling, we are Corcyra, and feel very smug about our diagnosis.
Yeah.
How do we use this ancient text to build a bridge rather than just burning one down in a cultural argument?
That is perhaps the most important question we can ask. The analysis makes it clear. The goal of cultural apologetics is never just to win an argument.
Right.
The goal is never to be the smartest person in the room diagnosing the rot of society. The goal is to point out the absolute necessity of a transcendent moral order. We use Thucydides to validate their valid concerns about power and corruption, but then we gently expose that the secular framework lacks any redemptive hope. It just leaves us sitting in the rubble of deconstructed words.
Right. We say, I see the exact same brokenness you do. I see the manipulation. But the cyclical pessimism of history doesn't have to be the final word.
This opens the door to the Christian meta-narrative. Creation, fall, redemption, and new creation.
Yes.
It offers profound explanatory power for why things are broken, the fall, the corruption of our physis, but it also offers the stability and hope that postmodern relativism fundamentally cannot provide. We aren't burning the bridge. We are showing them that the bridge of relativism they are standing on is actively collapsing, and we are offering a hand towards solid ground.
And that solid ground isn't just an intellectual debate tactic. This ancient text doesn't just exist to help us argue better on the internet. It actually equips us to live better. And that brings us to the ultimate focus of our explorations today. How this deepens a Christian's faith and equips them for daily life.
Because if we just stop at the apologetic argument, if we just use Thucydides to score points, we've missed the profound spiritual benefit of reading this text. First and foremost, when a Christian absorbs the horrors of Corcyra, it should produce deep, profound humility.
Humility is exactly the right word. Because I know my default setting. When I read about the atrocities in Corcyra, the betrayals, the temple violations, the mob violence, my immediate instinct is to think, I would never do that. If I were there, I would be the good guy. I would be the voice of reason.
But Thucydides and the Apostle Paul assure us that we would do that.
Yeah.
Without God's common grace and without the regenerating work of the Holy Spirit, we share the exact same physis. We are all entirely capable of this exact same stasis, the same betrayal, the same linguistic self-justification. We are all capable of calling our own reckless audacity courage.
Oh.
Realizing that the seeds of Corcyra are lying dormant in our own hearts completely destroys our self-righteousness.
It shatters it. And that realization makes the gospel remedy so much more astounding. Where Thucydides sees a hopeless, endless cycle of human nature violently breaking out of its cage century after century, the gospel offers something entirely unprecedented.
It really does.
It doesn't just offer stronger laws. It doesn't just build a better, thicker cage for the beast. It offers a completely new heart.
We look to passages like Ezekiel 36, where God promises, I will give you a new heart and a new spirit I will put within you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh.
Oh, yeah.
This is the New Testament concept of regeneration. Christ doesn't just manage the corrupted physis. He crucifies the old nature and resurrects a new one.
Think about the language corruption we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
The very first casualty of stasis is the word. The dictionary is inverted. But in the Christian worldview, Christ is called the Logos, the Word made flesh.
Yes.
If language is corruptible and fragile, what does it mean that God is the Word? It means He is the stable, eternal reality that grounds all meaning. He renews corrupted language because He is the absolute truth, and He heals the broken communities that stasis destroys.
The practical guidance drawn from this analysis is brilliant in its simplicity. To combat the creeping stasis of our modern culture, Christians are not called to form louder, angrier, more politically savvy factions. We are called to pursue spirit-led unity, to speak the truth in love, and to pursue genuine biblical justice. We are to be the people who absolutely refuse to invert the dictionary, even when it costs us social capital.
The material contrasts the violent passions of stasis with the virtues outlined in Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control.
What's fascinating here is the stark contrast in how power is viewed. Thucydides watched moderation get smeared as cowardice and unmanliness. The mob demanded aggressive action.
Right.
But Paul tells us that gentleness and self-control are the literal, tangible evidence of the Spirit of the living God residing inside a person. These aren't weak, passive traits. Gentleness is power under control. They are the ultimate supernatural antidotes to the violent value inversions Thucydides warned about.
It reminds me of what the analysis notes about the early church fathers, men like Augustine.
Oh, yes.
When he wrote The City of God, he was watching Rome fall. He read these pagan classics. He read Thucydides and Sallust. He understood the libido dominandi, the lust for domination that eventually destroys all earthly cities.
We saw it clearly.
But he engaged with that history to show that the Christian hope entirely transcends those secular limits. The city of man is ultimately doomed to stasis, but the city of God is built on eternal, stable love.
It is a beautiful intellectual synthesis. Augustine recognized the brilliant diagnostic work of the classical historians, but he knew with absolute certainty that the cure only came from the cross.
Sitting with all of this truly makes me love Christ more. When you stare into the abyss of what human beings will willingly do to each other when the rules are gone, when you look into the horrific darkness of Corcyra, the betrayals, the slaughter at the altars, the fact that God stepped into that mess, took on human flesh, and allowed the violence of our physis to nail him to a cross in order to redeem us.
It's just staggering.
It is breathtaking. It makes the grace of God shine so much brighter against the dark backdrop of human history.
It is the great hinge turning point of history, but it leaves us with a profound challenge for how we live tomorrow morning.
Let's make this intensely practical for you, the listener. You're getting ready for work tomorrow. You're commuting in a world that feels incredibly polarized, constantly angry, and increasingly tribal. What is one practical way you can embody this Galatians 5 antidote? How do we live this out in the office, or online, or at the dinner table?
It starts fundamentally with your words. Refuse to participate in the language corruption. Refuse to relabel your own sin to make it palatable. And refuse to demonize your neighbor just to score points for whatever faction you belong to. Be a person of stable truth and immovable, self-controlled love. When the world demands you join a faction and scream along with the mob, choose the radical, quiet moderation of the spirit. It will look alien to them. They might even call it cowardice, just like they did in Corcyra. But it is the only thing that actually heals.
What an incredible journey we've been on today. We've traveled from the bloody, panicked streets of ancient Corcyra, diving deep into the intricate Greek grammar of tragedy to understand how verb tenses can manipulate our empathy.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We've mirrored that ancient text against the profound, eternal truths of the Old and New Testaments, watching prophets like Jeremiah weep over the exact same societal decay. And we've used it to understand the shifting ground of our modern cultural moment, all to emerge with a much deeper, profound gratitude for the redemptive, transforming hope of the gospel.
It demonstrates that history, even deeply secular history, written by a disgraced general, when viewed through the lens of God's truth, is a profoundly useful tool for the Christian mind and heart.
It really is. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. We started by talking about the disaster movie, the earthquake, the collapsing buildings, the structural failure of society when the load-bearing walls of nomos, of human law and custom, are blown away by the hurricane of war.
Right.
Thucydides showed us that when those external laws fail, the raw, cracked foundation of human nature brings absolute, horrific destruction. But what if the ultimate guardrail for society isn't a stronger law? What if it isn't thicker concrete, more surveillance, or heavier chains? What if it requires a completely transformed nature?
That's the question.
What does it mean for your life today that the author of reality doesn't just want to regulate your outward behavior like a stressed-out city manager trying to keep the peace, but actually wants to rewrite your physis, your very nature, from the inside out? Thank you so much for joining us in this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and above all, keep holding on to the truth.